He was just a simple butcher, used to hard work and daily sacrifices to support his family. One day he received a tempting offer, a job in another country, with the promise of earning enough money to change his life. Without hesitation, he accepted. But upon arriving, he discovered the job was far more than he had bargained for. He found himself at the heart of a mafia operation, where drugs were being smuggled inside pig bones. From that moment on, his life turned upside down, with twists he could never have imagined. In the end, when he finally thought he was safe and returned home, he found only destruction, and a phone call that changed everything.
But before we dive into the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It really helps us keep bringing you more content like this. Already subscribed? Alright, let's get into the video!
An unusual story began in a slaughterhouse called World Livestock Products, where Maru worked as a diligent butcher. While chopping up pigs one day, he noticed that the genetic structure and organ makeup of pigs share an astounding 95% similarity with humans. Since human dissection has been taboo for centuries, pigs have often been used as stand-ins. As Maru focused on carving a pig with his blood-stained knife, the manager of World Livestock Products, Han Juno, barged in, urgently calling for him. The towering and broad-shouldered Juno stomped through a puddle of fresh blood and began boasting that, regardless of one's achievements, most people spent their lives like pigs in the mud. Juno, an imposing figure with a touch of arrogance, was both impressed and threatened by Maru's talent. Despite only a year on the job, Maru outperformed butchers who'd been wielding knives for half a decade. Paranoid that Maru was eyeing his managerial position, Juno raised a heavy axe in fury as if preparing to strike. Maru, though puzzled, stood his ground and gazed bravely into Juno's eyes as if defying the imminent danger. Juno dropped the axe swiftly, but instead of Maru, he struck the pig carcass hanging behind him. With exaggerated bravado, Juno rested the weapon on his shoulder and flaunted his muscular physique, taunting Maru by claiming he still had a long way to go before breaking Juno's personal record. As Maru busied himself sharpening his knife, he muttered that Juno should quit putting on such shameless displays. Meanwhile, Juno admired a perfectly cut steak Maru had prepared, marveling at the precision as though it belonged in a museum instead of being sold. Fully absorbed in his craft, Maru confidently declared himself the best, though deep down, he wished to be rid of the overbearing manager. Skillfully, Maru carved through the pig's skin, exposing clean, pink meat beneath. Juno, in awe, ruffled his hair as he observed how neatly the skin had been peeled away, leaving flesh and bone perfectly intact. Despite his talent, Maru's patience wore thin. He snapped at Juno, insisting that if he wasn't going to help, he shouldn't get in the way. Irritated, Juno barked at the accountant Kim Yong to let someone know that Maru's backlog was piling up, suggesting Maru could do some field work outside. However, Kim Yong was too busy stuffing her face with noodles to respond promptly. When Juno yelled again, Kim turned around with noodles dangling from her mouth and a shrimp tail poking out awkwardly. Juno, exasperated, accused her of preparing for a mukbang, an online show where hosts eat large quantities of food on camera, and sternly ordered her to stop overindulging. Grumbling but obedient, Kim waved him off, cheeks still full, and told him to bring something tasty back from his trip to the sauna. Meanwhile, Juno saddled his large frame onto Maru's much smaller shoulder, much to his annoyance, claiming he was just showing affection. Maru knew better. Juno's affection included meager pay, endless overtime, and constant interference. Officially, Maru was just a butcher, but Juno often forced him to do additional slaughtering work as well. With an exaggerated pout and an unsettling grin, Juno teased Maru, reminding him of his first day on the job. He recounted the time he brought a small piglet with an innocent, almost smiling face to test Maru's resolve. Most people would falter when asked to kill such a harmless creature, but not Maru. Without hesitation, he severed the piglet's head clean off, holding the gore-soaked head with an expressionless face. From that moment, Juno knew Maru was born to be a butcher. Yet today, Juno had dragged a reluctant Maru to the sauna during work hours. Seated on a wooden stool, Juno proudly displayed his sculpted build, while poor Maru scrubbed his back. As Juno babbled on, praising Maru's strength he claimed could be used to handle bigger challenges, Maru wondered if he'd at least get paid for this task. When Maru protested, Juno smirked, observing that Maru seemed to need a lot of money. Pressed further, Maru admitted this was true. Grinning triumphantly, Juno revealed its special job opportunity. One that, if accepted, wouldn't just repair Maru's home but might lift him out of poverty entirely. Puzzled, Maru listened as Juno asked if he'd ever studied in Japan. When Hamaru confirmed, Juno's face lit up in a wide, toothy grin, signaling that Hamaru should get ready. Before long, a plane soared through the Japanese sky, landing near a desolate bus station where a bewildered Hamaru now stood. But when he spotted his escort, his face went pale and cold sweat trickled down his neck. Somehow, 6 grueling months passed. Hamaru had been sent to a Japanese livestock company to help fulfill an urgent meat supply request. The work had been relentless, but for better or worse, Hamaru's bizarre journey had only just begun. Maru carved away at the pig carcass with frustrated, forceful strokes, driving his knife deeper than necessary. After 6 months of hard labor, he hadn't made enough to justify even a single day's effort. Grinding his teeth, he realized he could have earned the same amount back home in Korea and silently berated himself for toiling like a mule in another country. The situation at the slaughterhouse only got stranger. Despite claims of a supply shortage, Maru was the lone butcher on site. To make matters worse, a Japanese gangster had been keeping a hawk-eyed watch on him the entire time, puffing away on cigarettes like a chimney. The constant surveillance gave Maru the creeps. Annoyed, Maru shot him a pointed glare and barked in Japanese that smoking wasn't allowed there. Under his breath, he muttered a snide insult in Korean for good measure. Surprisingly, the gangster grinned and stubbed out his cigarette without a fuss. The strangest part of the job was their obsession with ribs. They demanded only cleanly separated ribs while discarding the rest of the meat. One day, Maru picked up a rib and immediately noticed something was off. It was oddly heavy, as though filled with something. To an untrained eye, the rib appeared normal, but Maru's experience as a butcher told him otherwise. Subtle seams lined its surface, as if it had been carefully split, tampered with, and stitched back together. White powder leaked faintly from the seams. It dawned on Maru why he had been hired. No inexperienced butcher could handle such meticulous carving without damaging the ribs. His precision skills were essential, and the Yakuza's constant presence ensured he stayed focused. Maru's hands froze as he examined the rib, only for the gangster to narrow his eyes, suspicion brewing. Feeling the tension, Maru quickly resumed his work, though his gut screamed at him to leave. When the gangster let out a low, ominous sound, Maru made up his mind, he had to get out of there. Later, Maru got Juno on the phone, and the manager immediately began yelling, furious that Maru wanted to return already. Maru snapped back, his voice sharp with frustration, reminding Juno that he had endured 6 months of relentless overtime, night shifts, and the Yakuza breathing down his neck. Juno brushed it off as normal, calling Maru soft for complaining. Juno argued that this wasn't child's play, it was a rare chance to earn serious money. Maru bit his lip, thinking of his family, the tuition fees for his younger brother and the looming credit card debt his mother couldn't manage. The weight of responsibility sat heavily on his shoulders, but his gut feeling about the slaughterhouse had only grown darker over time. Still, Juno convinced him to stay 1 more month, promising to sort things out by then. With no better choice, Maru reluctantly agreed, slamming the phone down in frustration. The sacrifices he made for money seemed endless. Back at the slaughterhouse, Maru furiously carved into a carcass, stabbing at it harder than he intended. If not for the money, I'd have left this hellhole ages ago, he muttered through gritted teeth. Lost in his anger, he didn't hear the Yakuza approaching until the man called out to him. Maru turned, only to see the gangster grinning with an unsettling smile, his pierced tongue flicking briefly out, a grotesque sight that made Maru's stomach churn. To his disgust, the Yakuza playfully pinched Maru's cheek, pretending to show affection, and thanked him for his hard work. "Without you we'd be in hot water, you know," he said cheerfully. Maru's blood boiled, his hands itching to fight back, but he froze when he caught sight of the gun tucked at the gangster's waist. He clenched his jaw and said nothing as the gangster tugged at his cheeks so hard that Maru's teeth showed involuntarily, and his eyes stung. Smirking, the gangster teased, "The more I watch you, the sharper your knife skills get. I'm tempted to keep a closer eye on you." Maru glared, resisting the urge to retaliate. Before leaving, the Yakuza mentioned that he'd be clocking out early, it was his girlfriend's birthday. To replace him, the youngest member of the crew would take over. Maru sighed in relief at first, only for his heart to drop when the replacement walked in. The cute and young replacement turned out to be an enormous sumo wrestler type with a pug nose and narrow, mean eyes. Maru couldn't hide his disbelief. This mountain of a man was supposedly the same age as him, an ant standing next to an elephant. The Yakuza introduced Maru as the skilled Korean butcher and ordered the replacement to take care of the ribs, warning that those ribs were their bread and butter. "What do you mean, over there?" the sumo-like newcomer asked, his brow furrowed. The Yakuza snapped, pointing impatiently. Over there is over there. Just move. Confused, the new guy asked for specifics. East or west, maybe? Exasperated, the Yakuza gave up. Just put them anywhere, he barked. That's when the ground began to tremble. At first it was a faint vibration, but it quickly escalated into a full-on quake. The iron meat hooks clattered violently against the bars, and Maru's heart raced in panic. Don't drop the ribs, the Yakuza roared, his voice frantic. But the massive replacement lost his balance, stumbling over his own feet. Maru could only watch in horror as the precious ribs soared into the air, gravity taking its inevitable course. As the ribs tumbled to the ground one after another, one snapped in half, releasing a fine shimmering white powder from inside its hollow core. Maru instinctively covered his mouth in disbelief, recognizing the infamous substance instantly. The Yakuza let out a dry chuckle, assuming Maru was merely shocked by the earthquake. Trying to smooth over the situation, the gangster casually declared the powder to be bone dust. Nothing to worry about, he said, waving Maru back to work. We'll take care of it. Maru wasn't convinced. He knew something was off, but for now he buried his suspicions and focused on the task at hand. Meanwhile, the Yakuza turned on the bumbling Method, cursing him for the mess. Method, his face wrinkled with confusion, blurted out a question. You're from Korea, right? When the Yakuza confirmed it, Method unintentionally spilled the truth, muttering that the bone powder was actually drugs, as if Maru couldn't understand Japanese. A chill ran through Maru. The Yakuza immediately scolded Method, yelling at him to shut up, but the damage was done. Maru pretended not to notice, yet beads of sweat rolled down his pale face as he carefully kept his head down. The Yakuza's expression shifted as realization dawned. Maru did understand Japanese. The atmosphere thickened with danger. Maru's instinct screamed at him to turn around, and when he did, his worst fears came true. The Yakuza stood there with a gun ready to fire. Frozen, Maru's wide eyes locked onto the cold steel barrel. His life flashed before him. The grueling work, carving pigs day after day, all to scrape together enough to support his family. The thought of dying so meaninglessly enraged him. Just as the Yakuza's finger tightened on the trigger, Juno's voice echoed in Maru's mind. You're a born butcher, Maru. Remember your first day? You didn't flinch. Efficiency over fear. Juno had always joked that Maru could carve anything, pig or human, without hesitation. In an instant, Maru acted. His knife flashed, severing the Yakuza's gun hand before the trigger could fire. The gangster's agonized scream filled the room, a sick splatter of crimson following. Maru stood still, knife in hand, finally accepting his role as the butcher. The Yakuza cursed and stumbled, trying to staunch the fountain of blood spurting from his wound. Maru watched, his mind recounting the hundreds of pigs he had slaughtered, each a grim rehearsal. Humans weren't so different, were they? The Yakuza collapsed, his neck gushing lifeless. Maru stared down at the body, the weight of what he'd done crashing into him. I've killed someone. Suddenly, heavy footsteps thundered toward him. Maru spun around to see the towering Method, his face twisted with rage. He roared, tackling Maru to the ground with the force of a falling boulder. The carcasses hanging above them swayed violently, pieces scattering everywhere as Method pinned Maru down. With furious strength, Method pummeled Maru's face over and over, blood spraying from his broken nose. You killed my brother, you wretch. He was a good man. Maru's mind reeled as his vision blurred from the relentless blows. Method's fist rose again, massive and unrelenting. I'm going to die here, Maru realized bitterly. But survival instinct kicked in. With trembling hands he plunged his knife into Method's stomach. The giant barely flinched, laughing cruelly. You think that's enough? He mocked, hammering Maru's face again. Finally, Method's hands clamped around Maru's neck, squeezing the life out of him. Maru's lungs screamed for air as his vision darkened. Blood poured from his mouth and his eyes rolled back. Then, in a moment of desperation, Juno's voice pierced through the chaos in Maru's mind. A butcher doesn't fight bones. He works around them. Memorize the path. Almost on instinct, Maru envisioned Method as nothing more than an oversized pig. He felt the giant's ribcage and slipped his knife under it, tracing the invisible path Juno had taught him. With a burst of energy, Maru drove the knife into the exact spot beneath Method's ribs, twisting it violently. The giant's grip tightened, choking the life out of Maru. Maru let out a guttural scream and, with one last effort, slashed the knife across Method's abdomen. A wave of red exploded outward, splattering Maru's face. As Method's grip weakened and the giant crumpled, Juno's words rang in Maru's ears once more. No matter what happens, Maru, you're a butcher. The method lay lifeless atop a battered Maru, both surrounded by a pool of crimson. Nearly flattened under the giant's weight, Maru struggled to shove the hefty corpse aside, mustering all the strength he had left. As he stared at the body sprawled before him, Maru's swollen lips trembled. Those lifeless forms reminded him of the countless pig carcasses he'd once carved with precision. But he quickly reassured himself. He had acted in self-defense. If he hadn't fought back, he would have been the one mercilessly slaughtered. Still, a troubling thought lingered. Would the police believe him if he turned himself in? What if everything he said was dismissed as nothing but weak excuses? Before Maru could dwell on it further, a chill ran through him. What if another Yakuza sniffed him out? Steeling himself, Maru came to a grim conclusion. His only escape was to destroy every trace of evidence. He'd have to burn it all. His thoughts were violently interrupted when a third intruder burst into the slaughterhouse, shouting curses at him. Maru hadn't expected another thug. The newcomer immediately opened fire, his bullets whizzing past Maru in a frantic spray. Panicking, Maru covered his ears and darted across the room, dodging the gunfire. The man was relentless, determined to hunt Maru down and finish him off. Maru bolted toward the large freezer room. The thug sneered, yelling that Maru had cornered himself in a dead end. Bullets rattled off the walls as the man stormed into the freezer. He scanned the room, eyes narrowing, but Maru had vanished into thin air. Smirking, the goon began taunting him, his voice echoing off the icy walls. He mockingly offered Maru mercy if he begged on his knees, generosity laced with venom. Suddenly the thug paused, sensing movement. He stepped forward cautiously and laughed sarcastically, claiming Maru had camouflaged himself so well that he could barely find him. Spotting a tattered boot, the man grinned, confident he'd located his target. But when he yanked the boot, it lay abandoned. Maru wasn't wearing it. Like a clap of thunder, Maru's voice rang out from above. Suspended among the hanging carcasses, Maru pushed with all his might. The heavy body swung free, crashing down on the stunned goon and knocking him flat on his back. Even as he groaned beneath the weight, the man spat curses at Maru. Wasting no time, Maru leapt from above, his knife flashing as he plunged it toward the goon. The thug's face twisted in disbelief. Before he could react, the blade struck a specific spot in his chest. Maru gritted his teeth, driving the knife deeper, anger pulsing through him with every insult the man had thrown, calling him a pig, a fool. In spite of the pain, the goon managed a smirk. "Wrong spot, idiot," he rasped mockingly. "If you wanted to kill me, you should have aimed for the neck." Raising his rifle shakily, the man attempted to pull the trigger, but his fingers wouldn't move. Panic spread across his face as his body refused to obey. Juno's teachings echoed in Maru's mind. The brachial plexus, Juno had said once, pointing to the nerve bundle on a dissected pig. It connects the spinal cord to the front legs. Same with humans, hit it right and they can't move. Juno had been so proud, holding up the pig and reminding Maru, pigs and humans, 95% the same. Maru's gaze hardened. Without hesitation, he raised the knife and silenced the thug's pleas, plunging him into stillness. The next thing Maru knew, he was boarding a 6-hour flight back to Korea. When the plane landed, he let out a heavy sigh of relief. After 6 months of back-breaking toil, he'd finally returned home. As Maru walked through his old neighborhood, stray cats scattered at the sight of him, as though they could sense the ominous air clinging to him. But Maru felt nothing but relief. He'd set fire to the slaughterhouse, wiping out every trace of his ordeal. The Yakuza wouldn't find him now. When he reached his house, Maru noticed the lights were still on, even though dawn had broken. Puzzled, he turned the doorknob, wondering if his family had stayed up waiting for him. He stepped inside with a grin, cheerfully calling out, "Mom, I'm home. I brought gifts this time. I earned a lot of money." But his smile faltered as he took in the chaos. Furniture was overturned, shattered glass littered the floor, everything had been ransacked. "Mom? Brother?" Maru called out frantically, his heart pounding. Then, his eyes froze on something that sent chills crawling up his spine. Lying on the floor was a pig's rib, snapped in half, with traces of that powder, the white powder from Japan's slaughterhouse, seeping out. Maru's face paled. How did this end up here? Before he could process it, a stranger's voice called out from the shadows. "Good thing you're finally back." A stunned Maru turned to find several burly men staring at him with stony, unreadable expressions. Terror gripped his chest. Had the Yakuza really tracked him all the way to his house? Before he could react, a bespectacled man confirmed Maru's identity, while Maru's mind raced with doubt. Could his mother and brother have gotten tangled up in this nightmare? The man, his tone cold and unyielding, announced that he had been searching for someone, and Maru had made the job easier. His hand moved inside his coat, giving Maru the sickening impression that a gun was about to emerge. Maru braced himself, certain this was it. The Japanese gangsters had come for revenge. He prepared for another bloodbath. To his shock, the man pulled out an identity card instead. It bore the insignia of the Drug Crime Investigation Division, and the name Detective Han Tarsik. Detective Han politely requested that Maru accompany him somewhere. Maru hesitated, unnerved by the sudden appearance of narcotics officers. He'd expected Japanese gangsters, not the police, and he couldn't shake the suspicion that they were investigating him for the murders and arson. Sensing Maru's hesitation, Detective Han assured him that details would come later, but for now they needed his cooperation. Maru, trying to mask his unease, boldly asked whether it was ethical for the police to raid his house without proper evidence. Before Han could reply, a younger officer stepped in frantically, desperate to clear up Maru's misunderstanding. "It wasn't us who wrecked your house," the officer explained, his voice tinged with urgency. "It was your mother. She got out of control." Maru's jaw dropped in disbelief. Detective Han's expression was grim as he revealed the truth. Maru's mother had been using drugs. Maru's mind reeled. He thought of his mother, carefree, almost childlike. She loved shopping even when the family had gone bankrupt. Her reckless spending had always baffled him, but her innocent smile had made it hard to be angry. Now the image of her in a desperate, drug-addled state tore at his heart. At the hospital, Maru watched helplessly as nurses struggled to subdue his mother, who was thrashing violently. A sedation syringe was finally administered, and she fell into a restless sleep. Han informed him that she had suffered a shock from a drug overdose. A wide-eyed Maru was shown the root of the chaos. Inside a sealed evidence bag was the notorious white powder, the same substance smuggled through pig ribs. Detective Han pressed Maru for answers, asking how long his mother had been addicted. Maru, genuinely ignorant, shook his head. Han's skeptical gaze lingered on him for a moment before he handed over his contact number. "Call me if anything comes to mind," he said before leaving. In the car, Detective Han sat brooding, his mind clouded with thoughts. He lit one cigarette after another, ignoring the discontent of his younger partner, who coughed and wheezed as the car filled with thick smoke. Finally, the officer couldn't take it anymore. "Sir," he said through ragged breaths, "this parking garage is a no-smoking zone." Han raised a brow, unbothered. "Then open a window. Or you could smoke outside," the exasperated officer retorted, throwing open the window to vent out the fumes. "You've turned this car into a gas chamber." But arguing with Han was like pounding on a brick wall. He merely snuffed out his cigarette in one of two overfilled paper cups and stared out into the haze, still troubled. Something about Maru didn't add up, but he couldn't put his finger on it. Back at the hospital, Maru stood silently by his mother's bed, watching her sleep. The events of the day replayed in his mind. How had things spiraled so quickly? He'd only been home for 6 hours. He'd destroyed all evidence at the slaughterhouse. How could anyone have acted faster than him? His thoughts were interrupted by a call from Jun-Ho Hong, his manager. "Maru, I heard about that fire at the Japanese place," Jun-Ho said, his voice laced with concern. "Are you okay?" Maru wasn't in the mood for idle chatter. He mumbled something about being busy and tried to end the call quickly. But Jun-Ho wasn't having it. "Busy? What kind of work did you come back to Korea for?" he pressed. "Come on, don't shut me out. We're like family." Then Jun-Ho dropped a bombshell. "By the way, what's this I hear about your mother doing drugs?" Maru froze. An alarm went off in his mind. "What did you just say?" he asked coldly. On the other end of the line, Jun-Ho burst into uncontrollable laughter. Maru could hear the sounds of attendants fussing over Jun-Ho in the background. He was clearly at a luxury spa, cucumbers plastered across his face and body. "You need to relax, Maru," Jun-Ho teased. "Why are you always so stressed? Your mom'll be fine." Jun-Ho's voice grew faint as the attendants flattered him shamelessly, claiming his skin was as smooth as a child's. One even swore he'd never wash his hands after touching Jun-Ho's feet, much to Maru's disgust. But before ending the call, Jun-Ho muttered something ominous. "Maru, if the Yakuza were after you, the Golden Horses would have found your address by now." Maru's head spun. He clutched the phone tightly, his chest tightening as the weight of everything fell on him. What had he done to deserve this? Jun-Ho contorted his face into an ugly grin, his monstrous teeth on full display as he jeered at Maru. "You've done nothing wrong," he declared mockingly. But you're an SSS class butcher, Maru, you'll be working for me for a very very long time. Junho leaned back smugly as if he'd won the entire game. You've already got a seat reserved, he added. Before Maru could respond, Jun revealed a new high-profile butchering case that made Maru's blood run cold. Maru instantly saw through the sinister game Jun had been playing. His voice was sharp with fury as he reprimanded Junho for being so vile. You destroyed my family, he snapped. But Junho didn't flinch at the accusation. Instead he smiled wickedly. Your little sister misses you, you know? Maru's chest tightened as Junho twisted the knife further. She's with us now, Jun said nonchalantly, left in the care of Kim Young, our glutton extraordinaire. The guy's life revolves around food and guess what? He's been funding her meals with your company card. Junho's tone grew darker. Face it, Maru. Your mother needs rehab and you need money. You could be filthy rich, you know, with your cutting skills. Maybe even buy a building in Gangnam. He chuckled. And hey, I'll throw in a car to get you to work. With a cruel laugh, Junho hung up, promising to talk to Maru soon. Maru stared blankly at his phone, his mind too numb to process anything. His grip on the phone tightened, the tendons on his hand bulging visibly as rage simmered beneath the surface. His expression darkened, his face becoming unrecognizable, an eerie shadow of himself. Elsewhere, near World Livestock Product, two men, Beck and supervisor Choi Do-ail, were busy unloading deliveries. Choi stood idly by, zoning out, while Beck's furious voice jolted him back to reality. Hey Choi, are you here to sightsee or to help me? Beck barked, sweat dripping down his brow. Choi, ever the cool guy, adjusted his glasses and shrugged. This kind of chore suits you better. Suddenly, a large package slipped from the van, splitting open as it hit the ground with a heavy thud. Beck's face twisted with frustration. Choi, help me get this thing back in? Cursing under his breath, Choi reluctantly grabbed the package. As he did, the contents shifted, and Beck froze in horror. The torn package revealed a human corpse inside. Choi's expression remained disturbingly nonchalant. Careful, Beck, he said dryly. If you handle the special packages this recklessly, I'll have to report you to manager Junho Hong. Why don't you shut up and help instead of running your mouth? Beck shot back, fuming. He pulled off his overalls in frustration, the heat and workload getting the better of him. Choi ignored him and smirked. If you're done whining, pick up the new B2. Or are you scared of him? Beck's anger flared. Scared? I've been dealing with the meat while you stand there doing nothing, you smug jerk. You treat me like a slave. Choi raised a brow, unbothered. You are a slave, Beck. Ever since you joined. Beck's face turned red with fury. His massive hand reached for a nearby meat club, ready to strike Choi down. But Choi was quicker. He drew a dagger with a calm, deadly precision. The two men squared off, tension crackling between them like an impending storm. It looked like a fierce battle between a fiery red dragon and a ferocious white tiger. Choi, ever the instigator, taunted Beck further. You've been a hulking brute since day one. I should slit your throat to end this nonsense. Beck spat venomously at Choi, his muscles taut with rage. And then, as if a switch had flipped, both men relaxed. The hostility vanished into thin air. Choi cursed Beck playfully, like nothing had happened. Take the car, he said as he headed for the basement. Maybe you'll crash it with that empty head of yours? Beck grumbled, glaring after Choi. The sky darkened outside World Livestock Product as Beck snored in the front seat of the van, exhaustion overtaking him. A sudden popping noise jolted Beck awake. He ducked his head out of the window and found a stray cat lounging on the van's roof. He squinted at it. Here to replace Choi, are you? He muttered, scratching the cat absent-mindedly. Smells the meat and can't resist, huh? But then Beck frowned. Something was off. Where's that nagging supervisor? He wondered aloud. Climbing out of the van, Beck's mind wandered. Choi had been late before, but this felt strange. As he descended the stairs to the basement, he muttered under his breath. Bet that rascal's having dinner with the newbie without me. He pushed open the slightly ajar door, still holding the stray cat. Inside, Beck called out, Choi? The cat stiffened in his grip. Beck's eyes widened. His hands slackened and the cat wriggled free, scurrying away in a blur of fur. The room before him was destroyed. Broken crockery and shattered glass littered the floor. Packages lay torn open, their contents scattered carelessly. A chill ran down Beck's spine as he took in the scene, his heart pounding. Beck couldn't believe his eyes. The sight before him made his jaw slacken. A body sprawled on the ground, face down. His first thought was that Choi must have gotten into a scrap with the newbie, and lost. "Hey, get up," Beck barked, nudging the body with his boot. "Junho's gonna tear you apart if you don't stop playing dead." But the body didn't move. A chill ran down Beck's spine as he realized something was seriously wrong. When he turned the body over, it felt like 10,000 volts shot through him. It was Supervisor Choi, lifeless, brutally taken down. For a brief moment, Beck's expression twisted into something disturbingly amused. "That newbie's got guts," he sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Pulling a knife on his seniors like that? Gripping the butcher's cloth in his hand, Beck called out to the newbie with a deceptively sweet tone, "Warning, keep this up, kid, and you'll get a one-way ticket downstairs, permanently." Out of the shadows emerged a ghostly figure. Maru, face dark and eyes blank, holding a dagger stained with blood. His expression was cold, but Beck only laughed. "Kid," Beck jeered, his lips curling into a smirk, "you newbies really don't have any manners these days, huh?" Maru didn't respond. Instead, he lunged, his dagger slicing through the air in wild arcs. Beck was unimpressed. "Think that's enough to take me down?" Beck asked mockingly, easily intercepting Maru's attack with his massive club. "You know, back in my day we had a saying, the strongest cow makes the best sausage." With a bone-rattling smash, Beck shattered Maru's blade as if it were a dry cracker, leaving the younger man wide-eyed. Beck raised his weapon menacingly, aiming for Maru's head. "You're not worth breaking a sweat over." Meanwhile, at Junho's office, preparations for a grand welcome party were underway. A lavish, three-tier strawberry cake sat in the center of a table surrounded by presents, fine wine, and colorful decorations. The hall bustled with activity, balloons being tied and the floor gleaming from a thorough cleaning. "Beck's picking up the newbie," one of Junho's subordinates muttered, disbelief written all over his face. "Why send that madman?" Another worker chimed in nervously. "Even Choi's got a reputation, but Beck? He's on another level." A third, loyal to the point of obsession, growled at the complainers. "What's your problem? Chief Beck and Chief Choi are the best we've got." The conversation devolved into bickering until someone noticed the workers had clumsily stacked themselves like a pile of blocks, the most zealous of them, Oh Junsik, at the bottom, gasping for air. Unbothered by the chaos, Manager Junho calmly hung ornaments on the wall. "You don't get it," one subordinate said, pointing dramatically. "Even 10 Chief Choi's couldn't match the strength of one Chief Beck. That man's a monster in a fight." The puffed-faced worker scoffed. "Isn't he the guy who won't stop making weird cow jokes?" "Sacred puns," Junsik corrected furiously, glaring at the speaker as if they'd insulted a deity. He then launched into a story about Beck's legendary strength. Once, Junsik recalled, Beck got into a brawl, grabbed a massive opponent by the throat and made one of his infamous cow jokes. "What do you call a cow on fire?" Beck had teased, laughing at his struggling foe. "If you guess right, I'll let you go," he had said. In the end, Beck's answer had been, carbon, a pun on tanso, meaning both charcoal and blackened cow in Korean. That day, Beck became a legend, single-handedly taking down every bully and gangster in sight. What sealed his reign was the mighty meat hammer, a gift from Manager Hong himself. "The man's unstoppable," Junsik said reverently. A force of nature with that club in his hand. Back at World Livestock's basement, the unstoppable force was in action. Beck swung his massive club with terrifying precision, forcing Maru to duck and dodge for dear life. "I can't believe you're the one who took down Choi," Beck growled, eyes gleaming with a manic light. "He might have been weak, but you're nothing more than a mosquito." The room echoed with the sound of crashing walls as Beck's club smashed through concrete, leaving cracks in its wake. "Hey kid," he barked mid-swing. "What do you call a cow that paints well?" Maru barely avoided a devastating blow as Beck answered his own joke. "Picasso?" In Korean, so means cow. Maru flinched, but Beck wasn't done. "What's with the blank face?" "I'm lightening the mood for you," he sneered, his attacks growing even faster. Maru's expression remained unreadable as he analyzed Beck's movements. Not only was Beck monstrously strong, but he was adapting, getting faster, more relentless. Beck noticed the silence and grew more incensed, his strikes becoming even more chaotic. "What's wrong, kid? Can't you at least laugh? Your senior's doing all this for you?" Maru didn't answer, his sharp gaze locked on Beck. He knew this wasn't just brute strength, it was honed skill. But Beck wasn't letting up. His grin widened, his every move demanding a reaction. "Come on. Smile, laugh, something." The room shook with the force of Beck's strikes as the battle raged on. Soon, another flurry of Beck's brutal strikes began as he swung his club wildly at Maru, spewing a relentless stream of cow puns along the way. Maru, however, refused to give in, lunging at every opening to slash at Beck's neck. Beck flashed a menacing grin, his teeth glinting like a predator's, as Maru spotted a blind spot and dashed toward it, gripping his broken blade. But to his dismay, Beck spun around at the last moment, clamping the jagged knife edge between his teeth like a steel trap. Grinning wickedly, Beck taunted Maru with yet another pun, asking, "What do you call a cow that bites a knife?" Before Maru could respond, Beck cackled and answered himself, "A knife-chewing muenster." Maru, undeterred, sprang back to his feet and swiped at Beck's neck, but Beck expertly dodged the attack. Mocking Maru's slow reflexes, Beck jeered, "Even Choi would have laughed at moves like that. Those scratches hurt less than a mosquito bite." Beck then swung his colossal club with full force, determined to teach Maru what a real attack looked like. The ground trembled with each strike as Maru, nimble and light on his feet, managed to evade the deadly blows, crawling to dodge like a desperate shadow. But as Maru realized Beck's speed had intensified, panic shot through him. Before he could react, Beck's foot connected with his face, sending him flying across the room. Beck grabbed Maru's leg mid-fall and with a sinister grin declared another pun. "What do you call a cow that flies in the sky? A sky moor?" With that, Beck swung Maru like a rag doll, slamming him against the ceiling with a bone-jarring thud. Blood dripped from Maru's face as he gasped, his body aching and head spinning. Beck didn't stop. Like a storm, he closed the distance again, his maniacal grin and gleaming eyes resembling a predator enjoying the hunt. But suddenly Beck faltered. Blood began dripping from his own wrists, elbows and knees. He stared in shock as realization struck him. Maru had been deliberately targeting his vital points. Beck's face darkened, his bravado slipping. "You aimed for my nerves," he muttered through gritted teeth. In that moment, Beck understood why manager John Ho Hong had hailed Maru as the best of the best. Maru, unwavering, cursed Beck under his breath and asked, "Do people actually laugh at those ridiculous puns?" The insult sent Beck into a frenzy. His face contorted with fury. Insulting his beloved puns, his pride, was the final straw. "I was going to go easy on you," Beck growled, lifting his club to end it once and for all. "But no one mocks my masterpieces." Meanwhile, upstairs, John Ho Hong was gleefully decorating a wall with colorful ornaments, a candy cane hat perched on his head. A large, heart-shaped frame featuring a photo of Maru was the centerpiece. To his colleagues' astonishment, John praised Maru's looks and talent, suggesting he could become a big shot. From their human pyramid, one of John's subordinates weakly complained about the weight of the others, while John Ho reminded them that Beck and Maru were the perfect match for a confrontation. Despite Beck's overwhelming strength, even John admitted he was no fan of Beck's cold cow puns. Back in the basement, Beck staggered. His once mighty club slipped from his hand, and he collapsed to his knees, blood spurting from his wounds like crimson fountains. No matter how much power a beast wielded, Beck realized, it could never overcome a skilled butcher. Through ragged breaths, Beck cursed himself. He had thought he was toying with the rookie. Instead, Maru had been preparing him for slaughter all along. As Maru approached, pressing the dagger against Beck's forehead, Beck forced out one last pun through trembling lips. "What do you call a cow that dies?" Maru raised the club, ready to strike and silence the puns forever. Moments later, Maru emerged triumphant, welcomed by a shower of ribbons and cheers. The employees, carrying gifts, celebrated his victory with excitement. Everyone was astonished by his unshakable composure as Jianho praised him for standing out in every possible way. However, a grim Maru, gripping a bloody dagger, raised his hand and tossed something toward the crowd. The lively energy in the room vanished as the crimson-stained ID cards of Choi and Beck landed at their feet. Maru declared coldly that 2 more pigs had been taken care of. The cheerful party atmosphere dissolved into chaos. A wave of enraged employees drew their daggers and knives, glaring furiously at Maru, the infamous butcher, who now stood as their lone challenger. From the sidelines, a slightly perturbed Jianho watched the unfolding chaos, wondering what kind of trouble Maru had stirred up this time. Yet, as Maru tackled the crowd single-handedly, employees wielding their weapons like madmen, Jianho realized that Punkt had grown far stronger than expected. One by one, Maru defeated them with ease, leaving Jianho stunned. Was he planning to wipe out every single one of them? Soon, a mob of weapon-wielding men charged toward him, but Maru tore through them with precision and a faint, unsettling grin, cutting them down as effortlessly as slicing vegetables. Seeing the mayhem, Jianho stepped in. He pulled out 2 drumsticks of all things, and began dancing in delight, chanting Maru's name like a fan at a concert. He swayed cheerfully, urging Maru to finish off the mosquitoes, while the stunned employees stared at Jianho, convinced he'd lost his mind. Pigs, Jianho mused aloud, were considered docile creatures, but they could turn aggressive when pushed. To handle them, a butcher's first step was to knock them out in a single strike. Likewise, Maru struck down the rampaging employees with swift, ferocious blows. Jiansik, watching in horror, screamed in anguish when he saw Maru wielding Chief Beck's revered hammer. Unable to hold back, he charged at Maru, rallying others to help him avenge their fallen chief. But Maru had already moved on to the second step of butchery, bloodletting. With deadly precision, Maru sliced through Jiansik's carotid artery and jugular vein simultaneously, causing blood to spray like a broken fountain. Before the others could strike, Maru grabbed Jiansik by the hair and used him as a shield. Jiansik's body became a pin cushion as weapons struck him from every direction. Amidst the chaos, one puff-faced employee screamed at Maru for taking Jiansik hostage and accused him of being a monster. The employee swore to save Jiansik while Jiansik, terrified, threatened Maru to back off. But Maru was already fixated on the third step, skinning. Skinning, the first step in dissection, involved removing the outer layer. To Maru, there was little difference between pigs and humans at this point, as he saw both as mere meat. Jianho, however, called Maru off, instructing him to save the remaining steps for another time. The bloodthirsty employees now lay still, scattered like lifeless pigs in a pool of their own blood. Maru wiped the blood from his face and turned to face the surviving employees. They trembled in fear, realizing they were no match for such brutality. As Maru approached ominously, they threatened him not to come any closer. Jianho interjected, reminding Maru of something he had said once. Maru shot a glare at Jianho and swung his hammer toward him, but Jianho grabbed it midair with one hand. Smirking, he crushed the weapon effortlessly as though smashing a ripe tomato. Jianho grinned darkly and asked Maru whether the people he just slaughtered looked like animals to him. Before Maru could respond, Jianho dipped his hand into a nearby strawberry cake and hurled the cream at Maru's face, using the distraction to taunt him further. Jianho admitted that he had expected this transformation in Maru one day. After all, Maru was cut from the same cloth as himself, a butcher at heart. Jianho suggested they go inside, saying they had played enough with the pigs for now. Maru wiped the cream from his face and fixed a deadly gaze on Jianho, demanding to know about his sister. He pointed his bloody dagger at Jianho with menace. At that moment, a frail, tearful female voice interrupted them. It was Kim Yang, shocked to her core at the sight of the bloody massacre. Trembling, she picked up a dollop of strawberry cream from the floor and licked it absent-mindedly. Her eyes burning with anger, she demanded to know who was responsible for the chaos. The barely conscious Jiansik stirred, about to point the finger at Jianho, but a heavy foot came down on his mouth, silencing him. Jianho nonchalantly pointed toward Maru, and the other employees quickly followed suit, shifting the blame to him. Maru froze, momentarily speechless, but the tension broke as a gunshot rang out. A bullet whizzed past him, embedding itself into the wall behind him. Kim Yang now stood with a gun aimed directly at Maru, her expression full of malice. She cursed him furiously as she began firing blindly. Maru dove into a somersault, evading the rain of bullets with acrobatic precision. Maru didn't anticipate facing someone armed with a gun. He figured that if he was up against someone with a weapon, he needed to be as close to the attacker as possible. He remembered the time he dealt with the third wheel Yakuza, who was holding a gun in the Japanese livestock industry. Maru had an inkling that engaging in such a fight would be highly dangerous. But it was his only chance to win. Meanwhile, Kim Yang lunged at Maru with the speed of a Kilkenny cat, which caught Maru off guard as she closed the distance herself. Maru couldn't tell what her intentions were, but to protect himself, he tried to disarm her by swatting her hand away. As he pushed her hand upward, Kim Yang began firing blindly, and Maru realized she was finally within his reach. He decided to end the confrontation with a single blow. However, Kim Yang, enraged, leaped toward Maru and knocked him down with a skilled kick. Maru was more stunned than hurt, as he hadn't expected this from a petite girl. Kim Yang didn't stop there, she continued to punch him under the chin. As Maru spat blood, he was bewildered as the girl moved like a rocket even in close quarters. It was revealed that Kim Yang had become so furious because she believed Maru had ruined her delicious cake, and she swore he would pay for it with his life. As she kept pounding him, a battered Maru realized there were no openings to escape. A smug Juno warned Maru to be cautious, as Kim Yong was the best trained by North Korea. In no time, Kim Yong locked Maru's upper body with a tight leg lock and aimed her gun at him. The story flashed back to a bloody massacre in a banquet hall, where guests were mercilessly slain, and the atmosphere felt eerily macabre. In the midst of this deadly scene, Kim Yong was stuffing herself with a lavish feast, surrounded by the gruesome corpses. Suddenly, Juno appeared, holding his axe flamboyantly, wondering who had killed the person he was after. He adjusted his flashy goggles to get a better look at the murderer. To his surprise, the killer was a little girl, happily devouring the food while looking at him with innocent, wide eyes. While slurping noodles, Kim Yong casually asked Juno if he was a soldier from the Southern Army. Seeing her tattered appearance, Juno grinned widely, revealing his monstrous teeth, guessing she was a poor child. Juno put his goggles back on and told her to enjoy her meal, even offering her a bottle of cola to wash it down. As the girl quickly drank the cola, Juno observed her with fascination. He thought that with her insatiable appetite, Kim Yong could make a fortune doing mukbang. As she chewed on a drumstick, Kim Yong had no idea what the strange man was talking about. Juno showed her a live mukbang, where a young girl was eating a lavish meal on a live stream. Juno explained that people earned money by acting like total gluttons. Kim Yong was amazed, having never seen anything like it. Her eyes lit up with excitement when she realized one could make money this way. Juno offered that if she worked for him, she could eat even more. Kim Yong glared at him like an angry cat, refusing to be bribed by food, as her revolutionary spirit wouldn't be swayed by American capitalist ideas. However, a cunning Juno quickly won her over, offering her an endless supply of meals, breakfast, lunch, dinner, late-night snacks. Kim Yong immediately bowed to her new master, abandoning her fiery ideals and swearing loyalty. She promised to serve him well, but didn't forget her first love, food, scooping up the entire feast with a tablecloth and vowing to return after cleaning up. Juno instructed her to bring him ice cream on her way back. A week later, Juno saw a headline about a strange explosion in Gaesong. He immediately guessed Kim Yong might be behind it. Meanwhile, a ragged and dirty Kim Yong was stuffing 2 popsicles into her mouth at once. Juno pointed out that one of those popsicles was meant for him. But Kim Yong simply chewed them down, acting oblivious to his complaint. At that moment, Kim Yong had locked Maru and placed a gun to his forehead. She tried to smash his head with the gun, but this time Maru dodged and slammed her to the ground. However, Kim Yong was unpredictable. She didn't fall but instead sprang up and kicked Maru in the face. They engaged in a fierce battle, each trying to outdo the other. Meanwhile, young Junsik received a message from his kids, cheering him on in the fight. His daughter wondered if he was working overtime that day. Junsik gently told her he'd be late, reminding her to eat dinner without him. But poor Junsik was rattled when his daughter mentioned they had already had eel for dinner. Now, Junsik had no idea what she was talking about, but the child kept rambling that her mom had gotten some eel for him and even bought a bottle of Bakbunja wine. Not only that, but she had also been told to sleep at her grandma's house that night. In the background, the intense battle raged on, but Junsik's mind was still stuck on the eel and Bakbunja, both known for boosting stamina. To add to the confusion, the little imp wondered whether they would be having soup soon. Meanwhile, his colleagues called out to him, urging him to take cover. But Junsik was overwhelmed with emotions as he saw his friends Song Chan, Ilbong Hale and Hattie. As the curious onlookers whispered about what he was about to experience that night with his wife, Ilbong even turned slightly green upon hearing it. Like a bolt from the blue, the massive Juno hopped over the trio, as if they were mere obstacles, and offered Junsik the chance to go home early that night. Frantically, the young man begged his master to make him work overtime. Juno, however, was focused on the fierce struggle between Kim Yong and Maru and noted that despite the apparent gap in their abilities, the match was quite intriguing. The puff-faced employee, curious about the outcome, felt that Kim Yong would likely win. Juno let out a wicked chuckle, agreeing that Kim Yong fought excellently, her skills as top tier as the mountains of food she devoured. The 3 onlookers were pounding their fists, and the puff-faced one declared Kim Yong the best among all the managers and employees. Juno interrupted, pointing out that while Kim Yong had been trained to perfection, Maru was an unpolished human being from the start. The trio was baffled, so Juno elaborated that he had taught Maru bits and pieces since he seemed like an interesting person. He recalled how Maru had fearlessly and emotionally beheaded a pig, and from that moment, he had constantly strived to improve. Juno remembered teaching Maru to dissect a pig's carcass in one strike, a task usually requiring at least a year of experience, but Maru had mastered it in just a month. Despite the difficulty of this task, Maru had requested a pain relief patch from Juno. But Juno wasn't done. Seeing Maru's exceptional learning ability, he decided to challenge him with something even tougher. He brought forth a raging boar, as slaying it was a task that even a chief-level employee would take an hour to complete. The boar was chained up, and Juno effortlessly sliced through the chains with his mighty axe. The furious animal charged at Maru, its nostrils flaring dangerously. But the gallant Maru quickly subdued the boar with the same chains, taking less than 5 minutes. At that moment, Juno's eyes widened in disbelief, his twisted grin growing as he realized he had found the perfect butcher he had been seeking all this time. Now, as Maru disarmed Kim Yong by swinging his knife, the fight grew even more intense when Juno grabbed Junsik by his hair, asking if he understood the meaning of the word butcher. A panicked Junsik mumbled nonsensically that the word was made up of the characters Ford, white, and man, and white could mean nothing, so the word butcher originally meant a man with nothing. Juno released Junsik's head with a jerk, as this intellectual rambling was exactly what he had expected from the only employee with a PhD. Meanwhile, after losing her gun, Kim Yong drew a jagged dagger and slashed violently at Maru, but he swiftly blocked her attack. Juno connected the intellectual meaning of butcher to Maru, explaining that since Maru had started with nothing, he could be taught anything. Kim Yong, meanwhile, was alarmed as Maru began mirroring her dagger moves. The battle between the dagger and butcher's knife heated up, their blades clashing with fierce metallic sounds. Juno predicted that defeating Kim Yong wouldn't be easy for Maru, but he couldn't deny that Maru was rapidly improving his combat skills. Kim Yong was determined to drive her dagger into Maru's heart, but every attempt was thwarted by him. In the end, the fight seemed to come down to whether Kim Yong could defeat him before Maru caught up to her, or if he could endure until help arrived. Juno sensed that everyone was on edge about the result, but he was determined not to let the audience see it just yet. The onlookers begged the manager to let the battle continue, one even offering to bribe him with cookies. But Juno swiftly moved away from the three stooges, releasing them from his weight, and dashed like an arrow to interrupt the battle. Maru and Kim Yong were both startled by the sudden disturbance, as Juno was ready to make things even more exciting. He challenged Maru to fight him instead. Juno believed that the battle between them would be more fun. Kim Yong, furious, felt Juno was mocking her, and she lashed out at Maru, blaming him for igniting her pride. Kim Yong was so fired up that she wanted to rip Maru apart to cool down. Juno flashed a dazzling smile, waving a coupon in front of Kim Yong, revealing a Michelin 3-star buffet at Shinra Hotel. As Kim Yong pointed her dagger at him, Juno teased her, saying she only had 1 hour to get to the buffet before it closed. Juno threw the tickets, and Kim Yong lunged for them, running after them like a hungry dog after a bone. Juno urged her to hurry, warning her that at this rate she wouldn't get anything at all. Juno thought of Kim Yong as a bit of a loose cannon, willing to go to extremes just because her cake had splattered on the floor. However, a brooding Kim Yong had already let go of her frustration when she saw the golden coupons. Next, Juno turned around and shot a sly glance at Maru, knowing Maru was waiting for him. In a fit of anger, Maru rushed at him, demanding to know where his brother was. But Juno casually blocked his attack, simply lifting his mighty axe as if he hadn't heard Maru at all. In an instant, he gently pushed his axe forward and sent Maru soaring through the air with great force. Juno mocked Maru, who was only focused on his brother's whereabouts. Grinding his teeth in frustration, Maru began to realize just how powerful Juno was. Suddenly, Maru felt as if he had been sliced in half, even though Juno hadn't even touched him. Juno sarcastically warned him that if he lost focus and lowered his guard, it would be over for him quickly. Maru zoned out as he remembered turning 21. After his father's passing, he had to step up as the head of the family, taking care of his 2 younger siblings. To support them, he worked at World Livestock. At first, life was tough, but with Juno's guidance, things got a bit easier. Back then, Maru was relieved to have found someone who treated him like a father, and he began to trust Juno completely. But then he recalled the painful memory of his mother losing control due to a severe addiction. Now, Maru screamed in anguish, tears streaking his face, blood staining his skin, asking why all these grim things had happened to him. In his blind fury, Maru attacked Juno for betraying him. He swung his knife at Juno repeatedly, but the seasoned fighter didn't seem disturbed by the childish strikes. Juno parried Maru's attacks with the flat of his axe and reminded him that whether one was cutting a person or an animal, it's better to keep things simple. The more complicated the strike, the bigger the opening. A startled Maru tried a new attack, but he screamed in pain when Juno flicked his forehead, explaining that he needed to tell the difference between a real opening and a false one. With a sore forehead, Maru frowned, realizing attacking Juno's openings wouldn't be effective. He began to analyze the best moves to defeat him. He recalled how he'd sliced through calves during his work. He could charge in and end it in one blow, just like he'd defeated Chief Choi. But then he remembered how nearly defeated he was by Kim Yang, and if he tried the same with Juno, he'd be destroyed. Maru realized that he would need a completely new approach to overpower Juno. Juno moved dangerously close to him, almost as if reading his mind. He warned Maru that he couldn't afford to space out during a fight, as letting his guard down would end it all. With a fierce battle cry, Maru charged at Juno, but Juno struck him with the handle of his axe. Juno mocked him for dodging in a straight line during a fight. Next, Juno advised him that making predictable moves or dodges would only lead to failure. Maru grabbed the handle of the axe, attempting to disarm Juno. But the massive Juno easily lifted Maru off the ground like a ragdoll, hanging from the weapon. Juno was astounded that Maru was trying to match strength with him and claimed that even with his toes, Maru couldn't take it. With a sigh, Juno tossed Maru to the ground, calling him a bad student who hadn't learned what he had taught him. Like a tenacious fighter, Maru sprang up and charged at Juno once again. But Juno kept dodging his knife attacks with just the handle of his axe as if playing with him. The three onlookers noticed how Juno was toying with Maru. The puffed-up man said that Juno was the fiercest, strongest, and most terrifying figure in the world. Another employee agreed, claiming that no one could truly understand a ruthless ruler like Juno. They discussed Juno as a beast, a force of nature. The puffed-up man admired Juno so much that he hoped to be like him one day. Meanwhile, the sharp-eyed Junsik observed Maru's every move. He noted that Maru was trying to keep up with Juno's pace and said that Maru was becoming the real monster here. As Maru nearly reached Juno, Juno dodged him but complimented his effort, advising him to aim a little lower. As Maru made aggressive attacks, Junsik realized they were witnessing the birth of a true powerhouse. Maru demanded that Juno fight him seriously instead of just playing around. Juno chuckled while spinning his axe like a windmill. He told Maru that if he wanted him to fight seriously, Maru would need to bring his best shot. When Maru struck with full force, his anger fueling each blow, Juno commented that Maru was improving with every battle. But one thing Maru was still missing was the stark difference between his smaller build and Juno's massive physique. Juno took pride in his size, knowing it gave him a huge advantage in direct confrontation. As Juno blocked Maru's knife with all his strength, Maru realized with dismay that he couldn't move him, even though Juno hadn't used his full strength. Juno mocked Maru, questioning whether he'd been eating properly, wondering how a small effort could possibly defeat him. Juno's face darkened with mockery as he mused whether a tiny opponent like Maru could ever have the strength to harm him. He flicked Maru aside with his axe, declaring that humans weren't meant to crawl like insects. Juno urged Maru to get up and face him. Juno noticed that Maru's sword had been broken, and decided that it was time for them to fight without weapons. As Maru swiftly turned away from Juno, the latter smirked, guessing that he had frightened Maru. However, Maru rushed toward a stray dagger lying on the floor with fierce determination. Juno swung his mighty axe around Maru, who aimed the dagger toward Juno, clearly intent on taking him down. But to Maru's shock, Juno pointed at his shoes, saying his laces were untied. Juno grabbed Maru's legs and pointed out that running with untied laces would only trip him up. Then Juno tossed Maru into the air, reminding him that the basics were just as important as anything else. As Maru crashed to the ground with a sickening thud, Juno looked down at him, wondering how Maru could survive without his guidance. After slamming Maru against the wall a couple of times and throwing him to the ground, Juno decided it was enough for the moment. He then revealed the real reason behind his betrayal and harsh treatment of Maru. The drug factory Maru had destroyed earlier had been worth 300 billion won. That was why the Yakuza had been relentlessly chasing him, like ferocious hunters. Juno feared that Maru wouldn't be able to handle the brutal forces coming after him, and in the end, it would be up to Maru to clean up the mess he'd made, as the Yakuza would hold him responsible. A battered Maru realized that his mother's addiction was the punishment he had been carrying all along. However, Juno could still see a glimmer of hope in Maru. He believed that Maru's actions at the welcome party proved that he could pay back the 300 billion. With a bright smile, Juno offered Maru his hand, inviting him to work with him. Though Maru seemed unconscious, Juno continued, saying that if Maru joined him, they could earn even more than 300 billion. Juno had made all the preparations and now all Maru had to do was show up. Juno turned to leave, instructing Maru that once he got back on his feet, he should get to work. A faint voice came from Maru, wondering if there was any deeper reason behind all the conspiracy. Juno could have explained it all simply, but instead, he had taken things much further. With a cold grin, Juno replied that the twisted path was far more entertaining. Maru fell silent, his body barely functioning, until suddenly he erupted into maniacal laughter. In an instant, Maru doubled over with sinister laughter, and Juno thought that finally, the boy had come to understand the fun of it all. Slowly, Maru got to his hands and knees, then rose to his feet, declaring that he had always seen Juno as a father, a mentor, and a guide. But sadly, all the havoc Juno had caused in his life had been for his own amusement. Juno had destroyed Maru's family for nothing more than his own entertainment. Filled with rage, Maru called Juno the pig and with a look of disgust, vowed to take him down. Juno, slightly shaken by the insult, responded with a savage challenge, daring Maru to bring his best weapon. Juno was burning with fury at being called a pig and demanded to know if Maru intended to slaughter him. Maru, reflecting on the fact that pigs and humans shared a strikingly similar tissue structure, remarked that no matter how virtuous someone seemed, they were still just like pigs. Meanwhile, Juno approached Maru, his presence menacing, and challenged him to try and take him down if he was so confident in his abilities. On the other side, seeing the severity of the situation, Chief Junsik wrote a grim letter to his wife, using his own blood to pen it. He feared he wouldn't survive the night and wanted to ensure she would be taken care of, leaving her slush funds hidden in their daughter's high school yearbook. As Junsik wrote, his mind was on the dangerous situation at hand. He realized that anyone who had witnessed Juno fight with all his might had ended up dead, and he feared the same fate awaited the trio. On the battlefield, Juno took a massive leap, swinging his mighty axe down to crush Maru, but the latter narrowly dodged, causing the floor tiles to crack with the impact. Maru swung his own axe like a deadly whirlwind, expressing pride in how far he had come. Yet, he was puzzled by Maru's strange behavior, wondering if he had forgotten the lessons Juno had taught him. As Juno swung his axe with all his might, aiming to take Maru's head, he scolded him for dodging in a straight line. Maru charged forward, ready to stab Juno in the neck, and Juno realized with surprise that Maru had been waiting for the exact moment to strike. He mocked Maru for aiming at the same axe that had pinned him to the ground earlier. Maru's dagger came dangerously close to Juno's face, and as it nearly touched him, Juno remarked that challenges were always interesting. But to Juno's surprise, Maru's dagger actually managed to cut through his chin, leaving a gash that ran from his nose to his forehead, slicing his goggles in the process. The employees gasped in shock, unable to believe that Juno had actually been injured. Junsik, eyes wide, noticed how Maru quickly flipped the knife and adjusted his stance. He couldn't help but wonder if Maru was truly that skilled. Maru wasn't done yet. He swiftly leaped again, aiming to strike Juno once more. Juno, now realizing that Maru was serious, declared that he had been playing around until now, but Maru's intent was clear. Juno slammed his axe into the floor with a mighty force, then lifted it with great power, preparing to strike down on Maru with full intensity. Maru was thrown back and slammed to the ground with a loud crash, but he quickly sprang to his feet, glaring at Juno, who marveled at his incredible stamina. Without hesitation, Juno swung his axe back, concealing it behind his broad, muscular frame. He then questioned Maru's awareness, asking if Maru could predict in which direction the axe would strike, left, right, or from above. In an instant, Maru struck the incoming axe from the right with Beck's hammer, sending it flying to the side. Juno's eyes widened in alarm as he stared at the broken axe in disbelief. With a grin, Maru made a clever pun related to Beck's infamous cow incident, implying Juno had just been beaten by a cow. He then replied with a cold, mocking tone, "It's die cow," before launching both the dagger and the hammer at Juno, not giving him a chance to retaliate. Junsik, recognizing the technique, screamed in panic. Maru was imitating Beck's style of fighting. Next, Maru mimicked Choi's fast-paced stabbing style, striking Juno's body repeatedly like a streak of lightning. Then Maru copied Kim Yang's rapid slicing, slashing horizontally across Juno. It dawned on Junsik with growing dread that Maru had mastered every technique from everyone he'd faced. For the first time, Junsik doubted Juno's victory. Juno, his expression tense and eyes glowing with intensity, grabbed Maru by the throat, stating that despite all his care, Maru had always viewed him as nothing more than a pig. He punched Maru repeatedly, each blow swelling Maru's face and forcing blood from his mouth. Juno continued to beat Maru's face until it was unrecognizable, his fists making a sickening sound with every strike. Then Juno tossed Maru into the air like a rag doll, snarling at him for being ungrateful and turning into his enemy. After a brief pause, Juno grabbed his axe again and claimed that he hadn't even used his full strength yet, though Maru wanted the fight to reach its very limits. Maru stood tall, his head lowered, fresh blood dripping from his face, creating a small puddle on the floor. Juno lifted his axe and declared that he couldn't allow Maru to win, not after all the chaos he'd caused. If one person had to be sacrificed for the sake of many, Maru was the one to go. He thought it would be better to kill Maru than let him retaliate with such fury. Maru, his head hanging low, wondered if he would die in this way, remembering that for revenge, he had discarded all memories with Juno. To silence his hesitation, he had to forget the good feelings he once had for Juno. Maru even convinced himself to throw away his emotions, seeing people as mere obstacles to overcome in order to win. Yet, despite his resolve, there was something he hadn't been able to let go of. It was his will to live. Suddenly, his head snapped up and he locked eyes with Juno. Juno, full of electric fury, was ready to strike him down for good. As Juno swung his axe towards him, Maru realized that his will to live still burned bright. With newfound determination, he gripped his knife tightly, his expression hardening, preparing to drive it into Juno's heart. But the climax of the battle was interrupted by a furious scream from Kim Young, followed by a gunshot. She burst into the room, accusing Juno of giving her expired meal coupons. In the chaos, the gun slipped from her hands. Juno smiled at her and tossed her a key, explaining that in his office was a safe containing all their contracts. Standing in a mysterious pose, Juno spoke gravely, telling her that half of the retirement funds belonged to him, and the other half to Maru. At that moment, Juno collapsed to the ground like a fallen beast, blood spurting from his wounds, while Maru stood frozen, unable to watch the grim scene. Maru slowly opened his eyes, tears flowing freely as his face twisted in grief. He challenged the lifeless Juno, daring him to come at him if he had the strength. In a chilling moment, the eyeball of a young boy was cruelly removed by the fiery-haired Juno. Juno was known as the ruler of a land of shadows. The place where he had been raised was called the Pixie Land, a place where humans were trained in the most brutal way, akin to pigs being prepared for slaughter. The humans were driven to their limits, starved, beaten, and pushed to the edge until they were almost beasts themselves. In the brutal fights for food, all but one survived, the strongest, Juno. Even after surviving the hellish training, Juno, despite his strength, remained a mere product of violence, constantly beaten and forced to fight. But the ones who survived that torment, like Juno, were sent on dangerous missions. On one such mission, Juno faced a group of well-dressed thugs. He asked one of them if they were part of the notorious blood-soaked streets of Mapo. The thug, surprised by Juno's knowledge, didn't have time to react before Juno swiftly stabbed him with a concealed dagger. The fate of those like Juno was already sealed. They were raised, trained, and ultimately discarded. As the other henchmen saw their boss lying lifeless on the ground, they immediately charged at Juno. But Juno fought back bravely, and once again emerged unscathed. However, even after surviving, he realized he hadn't returned to being human. Juno was still entrapped, distracted by a simple offering of food. He thought of himself as nothing more than an animal, living like one, and believed that one day he would meet the same end. Yet he survived countless brutal encounters, each time returning, not knowing whether he was killing people or simply another creature. One day, after another grueling battle, Juno returned victorious, only to find his master waiting for him, eager to introduce him to a woman. Juno walked past him unbothered. The master, furious, couldn't believe a mere animal like Juno could ignore him, so he grabbed his bat and stepped forward, coldly challenging him. He continued to hiss, wondering what the guests would think of such disrespect. Juno was puzzled. How could one expect proper manners from something so far removed from humanity? The master, embarrassed, apologized to the woman and claimed that while Juno was skilled, he lacked the basics of civility. The woman, however, was enraged and slapped the master for causing a scene. In that moment, Juno's anger boiled over as he realized that even the master was nothing more than another beast in disguise. Fueled by that realization, Juno seized his axe and charged at the master, thinking he was no different from the livestock he had been raised among. The master, stunned, watched as Juno approached with the fury of a wild animal. The bodyguards rushed to protect the woman, assuming Juno was about to attack her, while the master tried to stop him, warning that no harm should come to the woman. But Juno, driven by rage, was unstoppable, determined to become the leader of the beasts. With a powerful swing, Juno struck the master's forehead, knocking him to the ground. Blood poured from the wound as Juno yanked his axe back. Without hesitation, he took the master's blood and placed it on his own eyes, boldly declaring that if the woman wanted an animal to work for her, she should choose the strongest. The woman, impressed, finally smiled and decided to give Juno a chance. Thus began Juno's reign, a kingdom built on the training of beasts. During his days he met Yang the glutton and Maru the diligent one. Spending time with them, Juno began to feel that maybe, just maybe, he could live like a human. But one day the chairman called and ordered him to dispose of Maru and Yang. Juno was frantic, insisting that Maru had cleaned up the mess in Japan and had been nothing but loyal. He tried to argue that both Maru and Yang had been doing well, but the chairman's tone turned cold as she warned Juno that if he didn't obey, he would be discarded just like them or sent back to the pits of despair. Enraged, Juno slammed his fist on the table, feeling like a mere beast who had no choice but to follow orders. But in his heart he still wanted to save Maru. Juno thought if he could take Maru to the underground world, the chairman would change her mind. But then his anger erupted when Maru called him Pig Hum, and Juno couldn't stand the thought of being seen as nothing more than a pig by Maru as well. He briefly considered following orders and killing Maru, but he couldn't. In the end, Juno realized that Maru was fighting for something greater, something human. A wave of remorse and shame washed over him as he saw Maru's strength and courage. Juno, now desperate to be seen as human, asked Maru with childlike innocence, "In the end, did I become a human too?" With a gentle smile, Maru urged him to live like a human to the very end. And with that, Juno fell to the ground lifeless. The tale of the king of the beasts ended as he passed away as a human. A shadow then loomed over Juno's body, filled with sorrow, claiming that it was his honor to be the one to end Juno's life. The shadow revealed itself to be Choi Kijong, the same young man whose eye Juno had mercilessly taken years earlier. Kijong had come to take his revenge, to reclaim what Juno had taken from him, and now he prayed that Juno's soul could find peace. Kijong confirmed to the chairman that Juno was dead and that the safe under his charge had disappeared. It was clear that Kijong had a powerful force behind him, and he promised the chairman that anyone who killed Juno would be torn apart, no matter where they ran. Meanwhile, Maru, along with Yang, Junsik and the others, set off toward an unknown future.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, it really helps. And for more content like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see another part. I'd love to hear your thoughts. See you next time. Bye-bye.